Eliza closed the door of her apartment with a sigh of relief. Another long day at work was behind her. Kicking off her shoes, she walked barefoot on the cold floor of the corridor, feeling the tension gradually recede from her tired legs. Her feet ached and her thoughts were confused, saturated with the events of the day. It seemed that the silence of the apartment was supposed to be calming, but this time it only increased the strange feeling of anxiety. "Oliver, where are you, dear?" she called to her 8-year-old son. Silence. This was unusual. Usually, Oliver would have run to her long ago to greet her with a joyful shout. Elisa felt her heart sink. Hurrying into the kitchen, she saw a note on the table, written in the boy's uneven handwriting. "Mom, I'm in my room. I don't want to eat dinner." The words seemed to hit her consciousness, leaving waves of anxiety behind. Oliver never refused to eat dinner. Usually, he looked forward to sitting down at the table and telling them about his adventures of the day. Eliza quickly climbed the stairs to the second floor. Her heart was pounding and her legs were getting heavier with each step. She stopped at the door of her son's room and knocked. "Oliver, can I come in?" she asked, trying to speak softly. The silence in response was so loud that it seemed to fill the entire space. "I'm coming in now, okay?" she said a little louder and gently pushed the handle. The door slowly opened, and the light from the hallway illuminated the room. In the shadows, between the bed and the wall, Oliver sat curled up in a ball. His small body shook with sobs. The sight made Eliza's heart clench with pain and fear. "Oliver, darling, what happened?" Eliza quickly went over and sat down next to him, trying to meet his eyes. The boy slowly raised his head. His eyes were red with tears and his face was pale. "No, Mom, I can't tell you," he whispered and looked away. Eliza felt a cold stream run through her body. Something was wrong. She could feel it intuitively. Remaining calm, she gently put her hand on his shoulder. "You know you can tell me anything, right? I will always protect you, no matter what." Oliver's eyes filled with tears again, and he shook his head vigorously. "No, Mom, if I tell him, he'll punish me." These words came as a blow to Eliza. She made an effort not to show the fear that began to grow inside her like a shadow. Who scared you, Oliver?" she whispered, feeling her voice tremble. The boy shrank even more, hugging his knees to his chest. "No one. I just made it up." "Forget it, Mom," he said, and rolled over and hid under the blanket, covering his head tightly. Eliza remained sitting on the floor, listening to his heavy breathing under the fabric. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for any clue that might explain her son's behavior. But there was nothing, only silence and shadows. She knew she couldn't leave it at that. Rising up, she gently put her hand on the blanket. "Okay, honey, I'm here if you want to talk. Just know that I love you more than anything in the world," she said quietly and, without receiving a response, left the room, closing the door. As she walked down the stairs, Eliza could feel her hands shaking. She walked into the kitchen and picked up the note again, looking at the crooked letters as if they could tell her more than what was written. Eliza stood at the kitchen table, clutching the note, which now looked even more disturbing. Her hands were still shaking and her heart was beating faster than usual. She sat down on a chair and took a few deep breaths, trying to compose herself. What could have scared her son so much that he was afraid to tell the truth? Questions she didn't know the answer to tore at her soul. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, making her flinch. Eliza put down the note and went to the door, peering through the peephole. Max, her husband, stood on the threshold with a small smile on his face. His appearance brought a brief tinge of peace, but also more questions. "Hi, honey," he said, opening his arms. Eliza forced a smile and allowed him to hug her, even though she could feel her body tense. "How was your day?" he continued, looking into her eyes. "Long, as usual," she answered, trying not to let the excitement in her voice show. "And yours?" "The same. I was thinking about having a little evening at home. What do you say to dinner? Maybe I'll order something?" Max stepped around her and into the kitchen, unaware of the internal storm that was raging in Eliza's head. "No, thank you. I'm not hungry today," she replied, turning away to hide the anxiety in her eyes. "Where is Oliver? Why didn't he run out to meet me?" "He always does," Max said, looking back toward the stairs. Eliza held her breath slightly, thinking about her answer. "He's in his room." he said he didn't want to eat dinner and that he needed to be alone. He must have had a hard day at school, she said slowly, trying to come up with a plausible explanation. That's strange, Max said, frowning slightly. Should we go to him and talk to him? No. Eliza's voice sounded sharper than she had intended. Max stopped, looking at her in surprise. I mean, she added more softly, let him rest. He needs some time. Max stared at her silently for a few seconds, then nodded, although there was a look of incredulity in his eyes. Okay, if you say so, he replied, casting another glance toward the stairs. Eliza felt the tension rising again and hurried to get a glass of water. She took a few sips, feeling the cold liquid help her gather her thoughts together. She didn't know what to do next, but she was sure of one thing: she had to find answers. Suddenly, she heard Max come closer. His arms gently wrapped around her shoulders. Listen, honey, if there's something wrong, you can tell me, he said quietly. Eliza froze in place. She had to find the strength to answer. Just tired, Max, she turned to him and forced a smile. I'm going to go get some rest. Okay, but if you want to talk, I'm here, he replied, letting her go. Eliza climbed the stairs to her bedroom, feeling her heart still pounding. She closed the door behind her and sat down on the edge of her bed. Her mind was filled with thoughts and fears that kept her awake. She knew she had to act. The next day, the morning light peeked through the curtains, illuminating Eliza's room with soft rays. The night was difficult, as her thoughts circled endlessly around the conversation she had with Oliver yesterday. She couldn't find an answer to the main question: what exactly could have scared her son so much that he was afraid to tell her? Every new attempt to understand only added to her fear and doubts. When she woke up, Eliza lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling and listening to the silence that seemed too loud. Finally, she got up, put on a robe, and went downstairs. A soft sound came from the kitchen as Oliver sat at the table, bent over a piece of paper, drawing something. His face looked a little calmer, but there was still the invisible anxiety in his eyes that Eliza had noticed last night. Good morning, dear, she said, sitting down across from him. The words sounded familiar, but the shadow of tension that had appeared between them had not yet disappeared. Oliver looked up and answered quietly. Good morning, Mom. His voice was soft, and it made her heart clench even harder. Eliza looked closely at her son's face, noticing every detail: his depressed look, the slight trembling of his hands. She knew she had to be careful not to scare him. Are you drawing something? She asked, pointing to his sheet. Oliver nodded and plunged back into his drawing. It was an ordinary children's picture: a house, trees, sun. But there was one detail that made Eliza anxious. In the window of the house was a small figure standing alone, surrounded by a shadow. Eliza felt a cold jet run through her body. She touched her son's arm, making him stop moving. Oliver, I want us to talk, she said softly. I know you don't want to talk, but I'm here to help you. He lowered his head and clutched the pencil again, as if it was the only way to keep himself in check. Mom, I can't, he whispered, and his shoulders shook. Eliza felt her heart squeeze even harder. She knew that putting pressure wouldn't help, but she couldn't leave it at that. I understand that you're scared, she continued, but know that I will always be there for you and will do everything I can to protect you. You are not alone. Oliver looked up again, his eyes filled with tears that he was holding back with all his might. He looked so small and vulnerable that Eliza felt the anger at the invisible offender begin to boil inside her. It's not your fault, no matter what, she added, making sure he heard it clearly. You're not to blame for anything, and I will never leave you. The boy looked at her with such painful hope that it broke her heart to pieces. He seemed to hesitate whether to trust her, and finally whispered. He said that if I told anyone, it would make things worse. The boy's words made Eliza hold her breath. Her worst suspicions were confirmed. Her child was being bullied, and someone was keeping him in fear. She took his hands, trying not to frighten him even more, and asked. Who, Oliver? Who told you this? The boy shook his head, his eyes filled with tears. I can't, Mom, he said you would leave if I told you. At these words, Eliza felt everything inside her freeze. She knew she had to act immediately, but the most important thing now was not to break her son's trust. No, my dear, I'm not going anywhere, she said with a confidence that made her voice sound firm. I'm here, and we'll solve this together. Elisa sat next to Oliver, feeling the waves of emotion roll in one after another. Her hands were still shaking, but she tried to remain outwardly calm so as not to scare her son even more. She needed to find a way to make him feel safe, but at the same time not to lose the opportunity to find out the truth. Oliver, do you know that I love you very much? She asked, looking him straight in the eye. The boy nodded, not meeting her gaze. And I will always be on your side, no matter what happens. We will go through any difficulties together. Do you trust me? He raised his head slightly, his eyes full of fear and doubt, but he nodded again. Then tell me what happened. It's important, and I promise we'll find a way to make it right. Her voice sounded firm, although everything inside was clenching with worry. Oliver hesitated, clenched his hands into fists and whispered softly. It was Max, Mom. Eliza felt her heart stop beating. Max was her husband, the person she trusted most. These words sounded like a thunderclap. The room fell into a heavy silence, and the air seemed to become thicker, making it impossible to breathe. What exactly did he do? Eliza tried to ask calmly, although her voice trembled treacherously. Oliver sobbed and wiped his eyes with his sleeve. He came to my room when you were gone. He said it was our secret, that all adults should do this. His voice was weak, but every word echoed in Eliza's head like a hammer blow. She felt panic grip her body. Her breathing became rapid, but she forced herself to compose herself. The most important thing now was not to show her son her fear, because he needed her support. Oliver, you were very brave to tell me, she said, trying to make her voice sound confident. I will never let you get hurt. I promise you that. The boy sat silently with his hands in his lap. It seemed that his body had weakened after the conversation. Eliza gently hugged him, feeling his small body tremble. I'm going to go talk to our friends who can help us, she said quietly, releasing him. You stay here and rest. Oliver didn't say anything, just nodded, still looking at the floor. Eliza stood up and walked to her room, where she immediately grabbed her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Alina's number. Alina, it's Eliza. I need your help. It's urgent, she said, barely holding back her tears. What's wrong? Alina's voice became serious. It's about Oliver. I found out, he said that Max. Eliza's voice broke, and she was silent for a moment, trying to collect herself. Max was hurting him. Alina was silent for a few seconds before answering. Eliza, listen to me carefully. You have to leave the house with Oliver right now. Find a safe place and call the police. Yes, Eliza replied, clutching the phone as if it would give her strength. I've already thought about it. I can't leave things like this. Stay in touch. I will come to you and help you in any way I can. Eliza hung up the phone and quickly returned to the kitchen. Oliver was still sitting at the table, looking out the window. His gaze was empty, but now there was something new in it. Hope. Oliver, we're going to leave the house for a while, okay? We'll pack your things and go to your grandmother's house, she said, trying to speak as calmly as possible. The boy looked up and nodded slowly. Eliza hugged him, feeling the warmth of his body, and realized that this was only the beginning of a difficult journey they would have to go through together. Everything will be fine, I promise, she whispered. Eliza hurriedly packed her and Oliver's things. Her hands shook as she packed his favorite pajamas, a few changes of clothes, and the toys he couldn't sleep without. She could hear her heart pounding in her chest, and every sound from outside made her flinch. The thought that Max could return at any moment paralyzed her with fear, but she forced herself to act. Oliver sat on the edge of his bed, clutching a teddy bear. His eyes were focused on the floor, but he looked up when Eliza entered the room. We're almost ready, dear, she said softly. Just a little more and we'll be on our way. The boy just nodded, not saying a word. His silence weighed heavily on Eliza, but she realized that he had experienced a terrible shock. She sat down next to him and hugged him, feeling his small body tremble with tension. "I know you're scared, but I'm here, and we'll get through this," she whispered. Suddenly, the doorbell rang and she froze. Her heart started pounding and her blood froze in her veins. She got up and cautiously walked to the window to see who was standing at the door. Fortunately, it was Alina. Eliza quickly opened the door and let her friend in. "What's going on?" Alina asked, immediately looking at Eliza's face and noticing her anxiety. "He told me." "Oliver told me it was Max," Eliza answered, barely holding back her tears. "I didn't know, Alina." "How could I not have noticed?" Alina walked over to her and put her hand on her shoulder. "It's not your fault, Eliza. These people are good at hiding their true intentions. The most important thing right now is to keep you and Oliver safe." Eliza nodded, taking a deep breath to compose herself. She knew that panicking wouldn't help, and she needed to keep her mind clear for her son's sake. "We're going to my mother's house. She lives outside the city, we'll be safe there," Eliza said, clenching her fists to stop the shaking. Alina agreed and helped her pack the rest of her things. She and Oliver left the house, leaving the door behind them, which closed with a dull thud. It was the last sound they heard in their home before they got into the car and drove away. The drive to his mother's house was long, but the silence in the car was even harder. Oliver sat in the back seat, cuddling the bear, and Eliza kept both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the road ahead. Her mind raced faster than the car. What would happen next? How would she explain all this to her mother? What actions should she take to protect Oliver? When they arrived at the house, Elisa's mother was already standing on the doorstep looking for them. Her face showed concern, but when she saw Oliver run out of the car and throw himself into her arms, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, my baby, it's okay," she whispered, hugging her grandson. Eliza came closer, and her mother turned to her. "What's wrong, daughter? Why are you so worried?" she asked, looking at her daughter's face. Eliza sighed and looked away, feeling it was hard to say the words to explain the horror. "It's Max, Mom," she finally said. "Oliver told me what happened and we can't go home." Her mother looked at her frightened, and then turned her gaze to Oliver, who was sitting next to her, staring at them silently with big eyes. "Oh, my daughter," she grabbed Eliza's hand and held it close, "you made the right decision to come here. You're safe here." Eliza was sitting in the kitchen of her mother's house, holding a hot cup of tea, which was the only source of warmth at that moment. Her thoughts were shattered into thousands of pieces, and she didn't know where to start, how to put herself back together. Oliver was already asleep in his room, immersed in a dream world where there was no fear or pain. Eliza looked at the clock. It was well after midnight, but she was still not sleeping. "Are you sure we should tell the police?" her mother asked, sitting down next to her and looking at her daughter with concern. Eliza nodded, gripping her cup tighter. "Mom, I can't let this go on. Oliver has told me everything, and it's enough to make me act. I don't know how I didn't see it coming before." Her voice broke, and she wiped away a tear that had rolled down her cheek. Her mother took her hand and squeezed it. "It's not your fault. We all sometimes don't see what is happening right in front of our eyes. But you are here, you have made the right step. Now we need to act deliberately and prudently." Eliza looked at her mother and felt her heart clench with pain and gratitude at the same time. She was sure that no matter what happened, she had her mother's support. "I have already contacted Alina. She said she'll help organize everything properly," Eliza continued, "and I'm going to talk to our friend David, he's a lawyer. We need to know how to prepare for this legally." Her mother nodded, and a glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes. "David is a good man. He will do everything to help." Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Eliza was startled, but her mother quickly got up and looked through the peephole. "It's Alina," she said, breathing a sigh of relief, and opened the door. Alina came inside, shaking the snow off her coat. Her eyes met Eliza's, and there was a sense of understanding and support in them. "I've gathered some materials that will help us in this situation," Alina said, taking papers out of her bag. "We need to be prepared for any eventuality." Eliza felt the wave of anxiety ease a little. Next to her friends and family, she was beginning to believe that they could get through this ordeal. "First we have to come up with a plan," Alina continued. "We'll notify the police, but we need to have all the evidence we can gather. Is there anything that can confirm what Oliver said? Maybe recordings or any other evidence?" Elisa shook her head. "There is nothing like that. Only his words and my desire to protect him at all costs." Alina pursed her lips, looking thoughtfully at the piece of paper. "It will be difficult, but not impossible. We have to believe in ourselves and act decisively." Eliza looked up at her friend and saw unwavering determination in her eyes. She felt some of her fear melt away under this support. "I'll meet with David tomorrow," Eliza said, standing up and trying to find the strength to do so. "We'll discuss how to prepare for the legal battle." Her mother, who was standing next to her, silently approved of this plan, raising her chin. "We are with you, daughter, don't forget that." The night was cold, but the warmth that came from the determination and support of her family and friends made Eliza believe that together they could overcome this fear and find justice for Oliver. The next morning, Eliza woke up earlier than everyone else, tension keeping her awake. She dressed quietly and went to the kitchen, where her mother was waiting for her with a cup of hot tea. "How are you feeling?" she asked, handing the drink to her. Eliza sighed, holding the cup in her hands and feeling its warmth. "It seems that all this is not happening to me. It's like a nightmare that doesn't end," she replied, looking at her mother, who looked so calm and strong. "But this nightmare will end, daughter. And you will be stronger than it," her mother smiled gently, trying to give her confidence. There was a knock at the door, and Eliza jumped in surprise. She went to open it and saw David standing there with a folder in his hands. He looked serious, but smiled kindly when he met her eyes. "Hello, Eliza. I'm here as promised," he said as he came inside. "Let's talk about what we need to do." They sat down at the kitchen table, and David spread the papers in front of him. "First of all, we'll need to collect all the evidence we can. The police will start their investigation, but we need to prepare in advance. Do you have any messages, records, perhaps testimonies from neighbors or friends that could confirm what happened?" he asked, looking at Eliza intently. "No, I don't have anything," she replied, sounding disappointed, "only Oliver's words." David nodded, understanding her situation. "That's important, too. We will need the help of a psychologist for Oliver's testimony. It won't be easy, but he'll be able to convey his testimony in a way that will be accepted in court." David continued to explain the plan of action, his voice sounding firm and confident, as if he had been through similar situations many times before. Eliza listened intently, feeling a wave of anxiety gradually give way to determination. "Oliver will have to tell a specialist about everything," David said, looking at Eliza with serious eyes. "It will be important for the official report. I realize how difficult this is for him, but we have to find a way to make him feel safe during this process." Eliza sighed, running her hand through her hair. It was hard for her to imagine putting her son in a situation where he would be forced to talk about his fears again. But she knew there was no other way. "I'll talk to him, but I don't want to push him," she said, looking out the window, where snow was slowly starting to fall. "That's right," David agreed. "We need to create an environment for him where he can speak freely. Perhaps we should involve someone he knows well and trusts. Psychologist Alina might be a good fit." Eliza nodded. Alina's support was indeed invaluable, and she hoped that with her help Oliver would be able to find the strength to tell his story again. "As for the legal part, I'll contact the police department," David continued. "We need them to register the case and start an investigation. This is an important step." Eliza felt her heart beat faster at these words. The idea that they would open an official investigation was both frightening and reassuring. It meant that every step they took from now on would be important. I will also contact a colleague of mine who specializes in cases like this, David added. He will help prepare for the interrogation and develop a defense strategy for Oliver to avoid any additional stress. Her mother, who had been sitting next to her listening in silence, put her hand on Eliza's shoulder. We are with you, daughter. You have taken the first step, and now we have to go further. We'll do everything we can to protect Oliver. Her voice sounded confident, although tears were in her eyes. Thank you, Mom, Eliza replied, squeezing her hand. She could feel a new wave of strength emerging in her heart. She would do everything possible for her son. The next few hours were filled with endless conversations and planning. David stayed behind to help with the paperwork and contacts with law enforcement. Alina returned, bringing with her several folders of information that could help with the case. I'll talk to Oliver, she said as she entered the room. If he's ready, I'll help him speak. Eliza nodded, relieved to have people around to support her and her son. She walked into Oliver's room, where he was sitting on his bed with his favorite teddy bear in his arms. His eyes were red, but now they looked more like fatigue than fear. Hi, dear, Eliza said, sitting down next to him. Alina is here to talk to you, if you're ready. Oliver looked at his mother and answered quietly. Okay, Mom. If it will help. Eliza hugged him gently, trying to convey all her love and support. It will help, my boy. You are very brave and I am proud of you. Alina walked into Oliver's room, smiling in a way that made him feel safe. She sat down on the edge of the bed and carefully placed her papers on the table next to her. Hello, Oliver. I'm here to talk to you and help you understand everything that's happened. If you want, we can start right now, or you can just tell me about your teddy bear, she said, looking at him warmly. The boy hesitated for a moment and then looked at his bear and smiled. His name is Tom. He is always with me, he said quietly. I am sure that Tom is a real protector, Alina replied, and you know what? Today I will be your friend and your protector, just like Tom. We are together, and you can tell me everything you feel. Oliver sighed and leaned against the bear. It's hard, he said, taking a deep breath, but I'll tell you. Eliza stood by the door, watching her son, so small and yet so brave, begin to speak. The words came out slowly, as if each one weighed more than the last. But each word was the truth that was finally beginning to emerge. Alina listened without interrupting, but only nodded slightly, showing that she was here, that she heard and understood. Eliza felt her heart breaking with pain, but she forced herself to remain calm. Every detail was important in order to protect her son and find justice. When Oliver finished, the room fell silent, filled with a sense of relief and exhaustion at the same time. Alina looked at him with kindness in her eyes. You are incredibly brave, Oliver. You took a very important step today, and we are all proud of you. Eliza came closer and hugged her son, feeling his small body tremble in her arms. Now we know what to do next, Alina said, looking at Eliza. I'll make a report to the police and give them everything they need. We'll get through this together, Eliza whispered, looking into her son's eyes. I promise. From that moment on, their path to truth and justice became even clearer. With each step, Eliza felt her fear give way to strength, which grew in her thanks to her love for her son and the support of those around her. The evening came unexpectedly. The house was filled with soft sounds, the creaking of old floors and a slight noise outside the window. Eliza sat in her room, holding the phone in her hands, not letting go of it for a moment. Her heart was beating so hard that it seemed like it was about to jump out of her chest. She knew that the moment of confrontation was imminent, and she needed to pull herself together. When she heard heavy footsteps outside the door, she froze. Max had come home. His habit of entering without knocking and letting out a loud voice immediately gave away his mood. Today, he was calm, even relaxed, as he always was after meeting his friends. But this calmness did not bode well for Eliza, because she knew that today she had to find out the truth, whether it was just a suspicion or something more. She stood up from her chair and cautiously walked to the door, her hands trembling slightly as she placed her palm on the doorknob. The silence was broken by voices in the living room. Max was on the phone. Eliza held her breath, trying to catch every word. "Yeah, everything's going according to plan," he said, his voice low and confident. "No one suspected anything, and I don't think Elisa knows anything. She's too busy with her life and work to pay attention." Elisa clenched her teeth, trying not to give herself away. Her head was spinning, and a horrible picture was slowly forming in her mind. Every word Max said fueled her fears and confirmed her worst suspicions. "But don't worry about the kid, he's scared to death." "I doubt anyone would believe him even if he decided to talk," Max continued, and his words made Eliza hold her breath. It was enough. She couldn't listen anymore. Angry and frightened, she stepped back from the door and grabbed her phone. She had to act, and quickly. She wrote a short message to David. "He's back. I can hear him talking. He's talking about Oliver. We have to act." After sending it, she gathered all her courage to leave the room and go to the living room. When she walked in, Max had already ended the conversation and put the phone on the table. He lifted his head and looked at her with a slight smile. "Oh, hi, honey. What's up?" His tone was familiar, casual, but Eliza felt her blood freeze in her veins. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes wandered around the room, taking in every detail: the phone on the table, his relaxed posture, the shadow of confidence in his eyes. She took a step forward, trying to contain the anxiety rising inside her. "We have to talk, Max." Her voice sounded firm, even though she was shaking inside. "Of course, honey, what about?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Eliza took another step closer to him. "About Oliver," she said, not taking her eyes off his face. His expression changed for a split second, a slight flash of panic that immediately faded. But it was enough for Eliza to realize that he knew what she was talking about. "What's wrong with him?" he asked, trying to remain calm, but his voice was trembling. "He told me everything," she replied coldly, and at that moment his mask finally came off. Max stood up from the couch, his face frozen in a look of fear and anger at the same time. He took a step toward her, trying to maintain control of the situation. "You don't understand," he began, but his voice was not as confident as before. "It's just a misunderstanding. Oliver has always been a dreamer." "Don't you dare call him a dreamer," Eliza interrupted, her voice trembling with anger. "He was afraid of you, Max. He was afraid to tell you because he thought I wouldn't believe him. But I do." Max stopped, his eyes narrowed and his hands clenched into fists. "Elisa, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. It's not as simple as you think." Eliza felt her anger mix with the fear that coursed through her body. But she couldn't afford to be weak for Oliver's sake, for her own. She forced herself to stand up straight, keeping her gaze on Max, who now looked as confused as a trapped predator. "You expect me to believe that this was a misunderstanding? After what I've heard?" Her voice was quiet, but every word cut through the room like a knife. "I know what you were doing." Max tried to hold back the rage that was rising in him. He took another step closer, his eyes glittering with hidden aggression. "What are you going to do?" he asked defiantly, his voice husky with pent-up tension. "Do you think anyone will believe you? You have no proof, just the words of a little boy." Eliza felt herself struggling to breathe, but she did not break down. She realized that every word Max said was an attempt to intimidate her, to make her doubt herself. But this fear only strengthened her resolve. "I won't be silent," she said, her voice growing stronger. "If you think I'm going to be scared, you're wrong. I will find a way to protect Oliver." Max laughed, the laugh of a man who was losing control. He came closer again, and Eliza felt her heart start to beat faster. She took a step back, trying to keep a safe distance. "You have no idea what I'm capable of when I'm cornered," he whispered, his eyes glittering dangerously. Eliza realized that the conversation was entering a dangerous zone. She saw his hands trembling with tension. At this point, it was important for her not to lose her temper. "Then you should know that I have already told my friends what is happening," she said, raising her voice to make her words more convincing. Max froze for a moment, as if considering her words. His eyes flashed with fear, which he tried to hide. He clenched his teeth, trying to regain his superiority. "You're going to regret starting this war," he said, his voice full of hatred. "No, Max," Elisa replied, her voice calm but determined, "you're the one who's going to regret it." Suddenly, there was another knock on the door, and they both jumped. Eliza quickly looked through the peephole and saw David and Alina standing in the doorway. Max took a step back, his eyes filled with disappointment and anger. "Who are they?" he asked, trying not to let his fear show. "Friends," Eliza answered briefly, feeling relief flood through her body. She opened the door, letting David and Alina in. David entered first, and his presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. He looked at Max carefully and said without looking up, "We need to talk, Max." Max looked around at them all, his eyes glittering with anger and irritation. "Who are you to order me around?" he shouted, but his voice no longer had the confidence it had before. "We are the ones who will protect Eliza and Oliver from you," David said calmly, "and if you have any sense, you will leave this house now and not come back." Max stood silently, thinking about David's words. He raised his hands in the air as if to surrender, but his eyes were filled with hatred. "This isn't over," he whispered before walking out of the room and slamming the door. The silence that followed his departure seemed deafening. Eliza felt her legs go weak and she sat down in a chair, choking on her emotions. "We're here," David said, putting his hand on her shoulder, "now it all starts." Eliza sat in the chair, feeling every muscle in her body tremble. Her heart continued to race, and her mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened. David and Alina looked at each other, exchanging a silent understanding of the situation. Each of them realized that the current confrontation was only the beginning. "We need to contact the police immediately and make an official statement," David said, breaking the silence. Eliza nodded, but her eyes were full of fear. "What if he comes back?" "He threatened that it wasn't over," she whispered, looking back at the door behind which Max had disappeared. Alina, who had been watching the situation, came up to Eliza and hugged her. "You are not alone, Eliza. We're all here to support you." Her voice was gentle but firm. "It's important to stay calm and follow the plan." David was already dialing the police, his voice clear and confident as he explained the situation to the operator. "Okay, we'll wait for you to arrive," he said, and turned to Eliza after he finished the call. "The police will be here in a few minutes. They already received our statements earlier, but now it will be an official confrontation." Eliza sighed, fingering the collar of her sweatshirt to calm her nerves. She looked at Alina, feeling grateful for her support. Alina was not just a friend, she was a pillar to lean on in the most difficult of times. "We need to prepare Oliver so he won't be scared when the police come," Eliza said, trying to collect her thoughts. Alina nodded. "I'll stay with him in his room. We'll talk, and I'll try to calm him down." Eliza nodded again and led her friend to the nursery. Oliver was lying on his bed, hugging his teddy bear. He looked up when he saw his mother and Alina. "It's okay, baby," Alina said, sitting down next to him, "we just want to talk and explain that guests are coming soon." Oliver nodded silently, his eyes expressing a mixture of anxiety and trust. He knew his mom was there, and that meant he was safe. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Eliza felt her heart beat even faster. David went to the door and opened it. Two uniformed policemen stood on the threshold, their looks professional but understanding. "Ms. Eliza, we are here to record your statement and conduct a preliminary investigation," said one of the policemen, introducing himself as Officer Merrick. "Come in," David replied, inviting them in. He quickly explained the situation to the officers, noting that Max had recently left the house after a confrontation. Officer Merrick sat down next to Eliza and started asking questions. His voice was calm but professional to help her feel protected. "Ms. Eliza, is it possible that Max will return? Do you feel unsafe?" Eliza nodded, her voice breaking with tension. "Yes," he said, "it's not over. I'm afraid that he might do something to scare us. The officer listened intently, taking notes. We will start looking for Max and do everything we can to protect you and your son. Your testimony will be part of our investigation. He looked at David. Lawyer, we ask you to help us with legal support. David nodded without hesitation. We are ready to cooperate. Eliza felt her tension begin to ease. She knew this was only the beginning of a difficult journey, but now she was not alone. Oliver, hearing the voices, came out of the nursery and approached his mother. He gently took her hand, trying to understand what was happening. Eliza knelt down to be on the same level as her son and hugged him. Don't worry, dear. We are safe and the police are here to help us, she said, squeezing his small hand. The officers, seeing Oliver, exchanged brief glances and realized how important this case was. One of them came closer and said quietly, we will do everything we can to keep you safe. Alina helped Eliza calm Oliver down by taking his hand and leading him back to his room. David stayed in the room with the officers to discuss further legal steps. Elisa, after escorting Oliver to his room, returned to the living room where the officers and David continued to discuss strategy. Her anxiety was palpable, but she tried not to show weakness. Ms. Elisa, we will provide patrols in the neighborhood and put your address under special control, said Officer Merrick. However, we need to know all possible contacts of Max, places where he could stay or seek help. Eliza pressed her lips together, trying to remember all the details. She talked about Max's friends, his favorite places where he often spent time. She even mentioned the local gym where he went every night. David listened, carefully writing down all the details to pass on to the investigators. He realized that every detail could be key. We also need to prepare you for a possible trial, David added, turning to Eliza. It won't be easy, but we will provide you with all the support you need. Alina, who had just returned to the room after Oliver had fallen asleep, sat down next to her friend. I talked to him, she said softly. He calmed down a bit and started to fall asleep. We need to be prepared for the fact that he will need a lot of attention and help during this difficult time. Eliza squeezed Alina's hand, feeling grateful for the support. Her friends had become a real shield for her, protecting her from the anxieties and fears that seemed to grip her in every moment of loneliness. The officers concluded their questions and handed over contact information that Eliza could use at any time. Their professional and calm faces were reassuring. We will be in touch. If there is any news about Max's whereabouts, we will let you know right away, Officer Merrick said as he said goodbye. When the door closed behind them, the room fell silent. It was so thick that you could hear the heartbeat of everyone in the house. Eliza looked at her friends who stayed with her and felt a little lighter. She knew the struggle was just beginning, but now she had support and knew that together they could make it through. We'll make it, Alina said, looking directly into Eliza's eyes, and Max will never hurt you or Oliver again. David nodded, confirming her words. I'm going to go check outside to make sure everything is calm, he said and went outside. Alina stayed behind to support her friend. They sat on the couch, and Eliza felt the tension gradually leave her body. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her thoughts. I don't know what's going to happen next, she said, smiling slightly at Alina, but I know I'm not alone. And you will never be alone, Alina replied, hugging her. When David returned, he reported that the neighborhood seemed calm and that they could rest for at least a few hours. Eliza agreed, feeling tiredness creeping into every corner of her body. She went up to Oliver's room to check on him one more time before going to bed. The sounds of sirens broke the night's silence, filling the air with tension. Blue and red lights flickered outside the window, casting shadows on the walls of the room where Eliza sat, gathering her strength. Her heart was beating loudly in her chest, each beat reminding her that a new, difficult stage of the struggle was ahead. The door opened and police officers appeared on the threshold. A tall man in a dark blue uniform with a serious expression was the first to cross the threshold. He introduced himself as Officer Thomas Schultz, the team leader. His eyes quickly assessed the situation in the room. Elisa was sitting with her hands clasped tightly together, and David was standing next to her, remaining calm. Ms. Eliza, you reported a threat. Please tell us about what happened, Officer Schultz said in a calm voice, pulling out a notebook. Eliza swallowed, trying to gather her thoughts. Her voice was trembling a little, but she didn't let herself break down. Tonight Max, my ex-partner, came home and started threatening me and my son, she said, trying to control every word. He knows we are planning to testify against him and said it's not over yet. The officer listened intently, nodding his head. Were there specific threats to your life or the life of your son? He asked, taking notes. Yes, he made it clear that he would not stop. I have witnesses who heard part of the conversation. This is David and Alina, Eliza added, pointing to her friends. Thomas Schultz looked at them and they confirmed that they were ready to testify. We will provide you with temporary protection and prepare a warrant for Max's arrest, he said, turning to his colleagues. Contact the police station and give them all the information about the suspect. As one of the officers left to pass on the information, another approached Eliza, offering her a glass of water. She gratefully accepted it, feeling the cold liquid help calm her nerves. We'll leave a patrol car outside your house and increase the number of patrols in the area, Officer Schultz added. We also need you to come to the station tomorrow for a more detailed statement. David nodded, confirming his willingness to accompany Eliza. We'll make all the arrangements, he said, holding Eliza's hand. Officer Schultz reviewed his notes, his gaze softer. Ms. Elisa, I realize how difficult this is. But you made the right move by coming to us. We will do everything we can to protect you and your son. Eliza nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. The officer's words gave her hope that they were no longer alone in this fight. Thank you, she whispered. The police began to examine the house, looking for possible traces that could confirm Max's presence there. They recorded everything from fingerprints on the door to small details that could become evidence. Alina walked over to Eliza and hugged her to support her. Her presence was important. It was a symbol that even in the darkest moment, there are friends there to help. The officers continued to take statements, and the house was once again filled with tense silence, broken only by the rustling of papers and the quiet commands given by the police. Eliza sat on the couch, looking at the photo of Oliver on the shelf. His smile reminded her of what she had to hold on to. One of the police officers approached her and asked her to sign a document confirming her testimony. She picked up the pen, feeling every movement was difficult. This is only the first step, but we will manage, David said, coming closer and looking at her encouragingly. When the papers were signed, Officer Schultz summarized. We're going to stay here for a while longer to make sure everything is calm. After that, you can rest easy. Eliza nodded, feeling the tension begin to gradually ease. However, deep down, she was still afraid of what else might have happened. The morning after the night's incident was filled with a strange combination of silence and anxiety. Eliza woke up feeling tired, permeating every cell in her body. Her sleep was shallow and disturbing, full of fragmentary memories of the confrontation with Max and the subsequent arrival of the police. But the new day required strength, as there were still many steps to take to restore peace and security. Officer Merrick, who had led the police team last night, promised to come back to discuss further steps. The windows of the house let in the first rays of sunlight, which fell on the table where Elisa sat with a cup of tea, trying to gather her thoughts. Oliver was still asleep, and this short time of solitude gave her the opportunity to prepare for the conversation. The doorbell rang and she jumped. David, who was staying at her house for the night, immediately got up and went to answer it. On the doorstep stood Officer Merrick and a young woman in uniform holding a clipboard. Good morning, Mrs. Elisa, the officer greeted, his voice soft and supportive. We've come to discuss your next steps and how we can help you and your son. Eliza invited them in, and they all sat down together in the living room. The officer began to speak, explaining the procedures and plans to keep them safe. We want you to know that your safety is our priority. We will organize regular patrols near your home and provide you with additional protection. In addition, we recommend that you temporarily change your place of residence so that Max cannot find you, he continued, looking directly into Eliza's eyes. She sighed, feeling mixed emotions. On the one hand, she wanted to stay in her home, which had been her refuge for many years, but on the other hand, she realized that Oliver's safety was most important. "I understand that this is important," she said, looking at David, who nodded in support. "We are ready to move temporarily if necessary." The uniformed woman who had been silent all this time spoke up. "We also recommend that you meet with a psychologist. It will help both you and your son to overcome the effects of this stress." Eliza nodded, realizing that this would be really helpful. She looked at the stairs leading up to Oliver's room and felt her heart clench at the thought of what he had been through and how it might affect his childhood psyche. "We'll find a specialist for you to talk to today," the officer added, smiling slightly to reassure her. Eliza nodded gratefully. She was not alone in this ordeal, and that thought made her feel a little better. After the police left, leaving clear instructions and contact information, Eliza was left alone with David. He sat next to her, silently supporting her with his presence. Finally, she decided to break the silence. "I don't know how to say all this to Oliver," she said quietly, clenching her hands into fists. "He's already been through so much, and I don't want him to feel even more scared." "We'll find the right words," David replied, his voice soft but confident. "He needs to know that you're there for him and that you'll always protect him." Eliza nodded. These words gave her the strength she had been lacking lately. She got up from her chair and went to Oliver's room. He was already awake and sitting on his bed, clutching his favorite toy. His eyes, still sleepy, looked surprised when his mother sat down next to him. "Good morning, dear," she said, hugging him gently. "Good morning, Mom," he replied, looking at her curiously. "What's going on?" "There were a lot of people and noise last night." Eliza sighed, trying to find the right words. "Oliver, last night the police came to help us and keep us safe. Remember how I told you that we should always be honest with each other?" she asked, looking into his eyes. Oliver nodded. "I want you to know that I'm always here to protect you. And now we need to change our lives a little bit to keep us safe. We will temporarily move to Grandma's house or another place, but only for a while." Oliver looked at his mother with big eyes that reflected mixed emotions, from fear to hope. "Will we be safe?" he finally asked, squeezing her hand. "Yes, my little one," Eliza replied, hugging him tighter. "We will be safe, and I will do everything to keep it that way." Her words sounded convincing, even if deep down she wasn't sure about it yet. But she knew that it was important for Oliver to hear this, to feel that his mother would protect him, no matter how difficult the circumstances. After talking with their son, Eliza and David began to gather the necessary things for the move. Alina came to help, bringing bags and boxes with her. The house, which had seemed cozy and warm before, now witnessed the fear and tension that had been building up over the past weeks. "We'll get through this, Alina said as she hugged her friend. "It seems hard now, but time will heal everything." Eliza wanted to believe these words. She knew that there were many steps to recovery ahead, but now that she had friends and support by her side, she felt she could get through it. The new day brought fresh air and light sunshine that flooded the streets of the town. Eliza, holding Oliver's hand, walked out of her mother's house, where they were temporarily staying. David and Alina, who had helped in the most difficult moments, stayed at home to organize things and prepare a plan for further action. But today was a special day, the day when Eliza decided to take the first step towards returning to normal life. "Mommy, can we go to the park?" Oliver asked, his eyes sparkling with joy and anticipation. Eliza smiled and nodded. "Yes, dear. We are going to the park to play and relax for a while." On their way to the park, they passed by the familiar streets where they used to walk, laugh, and talk about the future. Today everything looked a little different, but Eliza felt that this trip was important not only for Oliver, but also for her. She wanted to show her son that despite everything, life goes on, and they can find new moments of happiness together. The park was filled with the laughter of children playing on the swings and climbing frames. Moms and dads sat on benches talking to each other. Eliza stopped for a moment, breathed in the fresh air, and felt a little excitement. Would they be able to find the peace they were looking for? Mommy, look, there's a swing! Oliver shouted and pulled her hand. They got closer to the playground, and Oliver immediately ran to the swing, his laughter filling the air. Eliza watched him with a smile on her face. It was the first time in a long time that she had seen her son so happy and carefree. Her heart swelled with joy and relief. Next to them sat another mom with a girl about the same age as Oliver. The girl looked at the boy with curiosity and ran up to him. "Hi, my name is Sophia. Do you want to play together?" she asked, smiling. "Hi, I'm Oliver." "Yes, let's play," he replied, his eyes shining with delight. Eliza felt her soul fill with warmth as she watched the children play together. She caught a glimpse of Sophia's mom, who smiled at her. "They get along very quickly, don't they?" the stranger said, laughing slightly. "Yes, children are really good at making friends," Eliza replied, feeling a little more confident. They exchanged a few words, and after a few minutes the conversation became casual. This meeting was important for Eliza, an opportunity to feel that her life was not limited to fears and worries. She felt that a return to normalcy was possible, and this small step into the park was the beginning they both needed. Oliver and Sophia ran around the playground, playing hide and seek, laughing and making a lot of noise. Their laughter was like music, filling the air with energy and joy. Eliza couldn't take her eyes off her son. His happy expression was a reminder that she had made the right choice in bringing him here. "We come here often," continued Sophia's mother, Lisa. "This place somehow always helps to distract us from everyday worries." "That's right," Eliza nodded, watching the children climb onto the Lazy Susan and start making up a game with made-up rules. Lisa looked at Eliza with understanding and didn't ask any more questions. This was a nice feature of new acquaintances. They didn't need unnecessary questions, just support and casual conversations that could make you feel part of a community. Meanwhile, a few more kids approached the children, and the game became even more fun. Oliver enthusiastically told the other children about his toy cars and planned how he would bring them to the park next time. Eliza couldn't help but smile when she saw him so happy. "You are a strong mom," Lisa suddenly said, looking at Eliza with warmth in her eyes. "I can see that you have been through a lot, but you are still here, supporting your son and laughing with him." Lisa's words penetrated right into Eliza's heart, and she felt her eyes fill with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. She wiped them away with her fingertips and nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We all try to do the best we can for our children." After a few hours in the park, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Eliza gathered Oliver and said goodbye to Lisa and Sophia. They exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet again the following week. On the way home, Oliver couldn't stop talking about his new friends and how they had built the tallest tower in the sandbox together. His joy filled the car with warmth that made Eliza smile. "Mom, can we go to the park again?" he asked when they were near the house. "Of course, dear. We will go again," she answered, hugging him tightly. It was only the first step, but it meant so much. As the evening light flooded the room with a soft glow, Eliza sat in her mother's kitchen, enjoying the smell of freshly brewed coffee. After she and Oliver returned from the park, they both felt much better. The little boy fell asleep quickly, still babbling about his new friends and games. It was the first day in a long time that Eliza felt like things were starting to fall into place. Her mother, Alina, came over and sat down next to her, looking at her daughter with a mixture of concern and pride. "How are you, dear?" she asked, holding a warm cup in her hands. Eliza smiled, although her eyes betrayed the fatigue that still remained after all the events she had experienced. "Today was good, Mom. Oliver was so happy in the park, and I felt like I could breathe freely again, at least a little bit," she said, leaning back in her chair. Alina looked at her daughter and nodded, thinking about how to bring up the issue that was bothering her. "You know this isn't over, right? We need to talk about what happens next, legally speaking. Have you contacted a lawyer yet?" Eliza looked down at her coffee cup. She knew this moment would come, but she wasn't ready for it yet. "Yes, David helped me find a lawyer who specializes in family protection cases and cases of violence. Tomorrow we will meet to discuss the details and prepare a formal statement, she said, trying to make her voice sound confident. Alina gently touched her daughter's hand to support her. This is the right step. Max must be held accountable for his actions, and we will do everything we can to ensure your safety and Oliver's safety. Eliza looked up and met her mother's eyes, which held so much determination. She knew her mom would be there for her, no matter how long it took. I know, Mom. And I am grateful to you for everything. You helped me to keep my balance when I thought everything was lost. Alina smiled slightly and shook her head. You are stronger than you think, Eliza. But you are not alone now. We will all get through this together. They sat in silence, enjoying a moment of peace that gave them the strength to continue. Every drop of coffee, every moment of conversation made them feel that there was still a lot of struggle ahead, but they were ready for it. The next morning was quiet and peaceful. Birds were singing outside the window, and it was a pleasant reminder that life goes on. Eliza went into the kitchen where her mother was already preparing breakfast. The smell of fried eggs and fresh bread filled the room. Today is an important day, Alina said as she handed her daughter a plate. The lawyer will help you sort out all the legal issues and tell you how to proceed. Eliza nodded, feeling slightly excited. Meeting with the lawyer meant another step toward justice and security for her and her son. After breakfast, she went to Oliver to explain to him that she would be busy today. Mommy, are you going to see those serious people? He asked as Eliza sat on the edge of his bed. Yes, darling, she answered, stroking his hair, but it's to keep you and me safe. I promise to be back soon. Oliver nodded, his eyes shining with hope. Then I'll wait for you and we'll go to the park again, okay? Eliza smiled and held him close. Of course, baby. We will definitely go. Leaving the house, she met David, who was waiting for her outside. He was dressed in a formal suit and holding a file with documents. Ready? He asked, his serious expression showing how important this day was. I'm ready, she said, taking a deep breath and lifting her head. When they arrived at the lawyer's office, they were greeted by a middle-aged man with a warm gaze and confident manner. He introduced himself as Marcus Lind, a family law specialist. Ms. Elisa, I have read your case and want to assure you that we will do everything we can to protect you and your child, he said as they sat down at a round table in his spacious office. Eliza felt the tension ease a little. The lawyer sounded confident, and that gave her hope. Thank you, Mr. Marcus. I want this to be over as soon as possible, but I'm ready to fight if necessary, she said, looking him straight in the eye. Marcus nodded as he laid out the documents in front of her. First of all, we'll file a formal complaint with the court and a restraining order. This will help keep you safe. In addition, we will need to prepare for a possible court case against Max. David sat next to her and supported Eliza with his presence. He knew this battle would be hard, but he could see that his girlfriend was ready for it. After an hour of discussions and signing documents, Eliza left the office feeling relieved. It was only the beginning of a long process, but the first steps had been taken. As they drove home, Eliza felt a sense of relief. She knew there would still be many obstacles ahead, but today she had taken another step toward a future where she and Oliver would be safe. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. We hope that it has evoked emotions and made you think. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. We will be very pleased if you leave a comment. Your opinion is important to us. We would also like to apologize for any errors in the text or voice acting. This story was created with the help of artificial intelligence, and our team continues to improve to provide you with quality content. Thank you for your understanding and support.